Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about two collections of short stories that I just finished recently. The first is Where Are You Really From by Elaine Xie Cho. I picked this up when I was in the library because I thought the cover was pretty. And then the other is It Never Rains on National Day by Jeremy Tiang. So this one came out in 2025, so this year, but this short story collection came out in 2016. Oh, actually it came out in 2015. And this I also saw in the library, but I've never picked it up. I think one false assumption I have is when I see stuff in the Singapore collection part of the library and it looks like this, I just kind of write it off and think it's going to be like cheesy or, I don't know, not good. But I am trying to read all of the singlet out there, and this one I've always seen in all the different libraries, so I finally picked it up. It's actually really good. So don't be fooled by the fact that it's like, prominently displayed in the Singapore collection area of the library. It's really fresh and edgy, even though it's almost a decade old now. I really enjoyed it. So I think I'll share a little bit about both of these collections and then maybe end with some thoughts around short story collections. I read several at this point, and I think they're a very interesting form of writing. And I have never written anything myself, but they seem to require a different skill set or a different stylistic endeavor than writing a novel. So reading these so close to each other has let me reflect on that a little bit. But first, just to talk about Where Are You Really From, Elaine had written another novel called Disorientation, which I haven't read, but this is a collection of mostly short stories and then also a novella at the end. So there are 6 short stories and then a novella called Casualties of Art. And some of these were hit and miss, but overall, I think the entire collection is really worth a read. It deals with a lot of really interesting themes related to being a Asian or diaspora Asian female, and kind of the way that lived identity is perceived by society as well as men. I will point out a few of my favorite stories. In general, they are quite dystopian. They have elements of sci-fi. So I really liked that marriage between kind of the exploration of identity and what it means to be a woman as well as an Asian woman, coupled with some kind of like interesting either like Westworld or Black Mirror type of story premises. Some of them I feel like didn't work for me, but I'm still glad that Elaine tried. And I feel like in each story, she is doing something and like pushing the envelope, and just even if it doesn't fully 100% land successfully, I still really like laud the effort and enjoyed being along for the ride. First of all, I'll start with the epigraph. I think epigraphs are a really interesting thing in general, but especially for short story collections, the epigraph can kind of tie it together. The epigraph to this short story collection is a quote from Susan Sontag, obviously the extremely famous critic, and it is, "Don't you think at the very center of the whole enterprise of storytelling is the fact that storytelling is an activity that faces in 2 directions. On the one hand, it's connected with an idea of truth. On the other hand, it's connected with an idea of invention, imagination, lies." So I do think this is a really good epigraph for like any collection of short stories or any like book of different short fiction pieces, but I do think it does kind of tie into the overall project of this collection of short stories, because there is that like dystopian or sci-fi element to almost all of the stories. In fact, the only one that doesn't really have that is the one that I think I related to the most. It's called Carrot Legs, and I think the opening sentence of this short story is really impactful. It goes, "In America, I was not beautiful, but in Taiwan, I was ugly. And then I think it goes on to describe something that is a quite specific feeling or experience, but something that I can understand. I understood this before I even set foot in Taipei. On the way from the airport, I passed advertisements for skin whitening creams, double eyelid surgery, circle contact lenses. I hadn't been aware of all the variations of myself that lay dormant inside me, waiting to be enhanced. Growing up, wishing for naturally blue eyes or blonde hair was pointless, so I never did. But in Taipei, the standard for attainable beauty had shifted, and I alone was responsible for my ugliness. Another one of the short stories I really liked is called You Put a Rabbit on Me. It's a little bit on the nose, but essentially this woman moves to Paris to find herself, and then she literally finds herself. Like, there's a clone of her, or there's her double. It's never really explained. And then through that premise, there's an exploration of what it means to like want to become a better person, or the main character being jealous of this person. So I thought that was like just fun to read and kind of think about. Then there are two short stories that really deal with the idea of sex work as well as the sexualization of the Asian body. I guess specifically in the short story called Happy Endings, which I actually found very difficult to read because it was so graphic. But I think it was pretty powerful in what Elaine was trying to achieve in terms of, you know, she uses the idea of like sex robots to kind of act as a vehicle for how Asian bodies and Asian female bodies are sexualized, and how sex work is treated, especially in this case by white expats in Hong Kong, but all over Asia and Southeast Asia. The other one called The Dollhouse, I guess, is less about sex work. It's more about coming to the US and being pregnant and then trying to have your baby there in order to get citizenship, although it's called Dreamland. And that is a little bit similar to Mail Order Love, which is another short story which talks about this lonely guy who orders a doll off of the internet to be his wife, I guess, and she does it because she's looking for a better life, but he's doing it for companionship. And again, there's like the suspension of reality there in terms of we can't ship people, like real people, but the premise is kind of fun. It's like Black Mirror in the sense that in this futuristic world, trade has been shut down. There's like no imports from overseas, or there's no immigration. There's no immigration, but imports are still allowed. So they have this loophole for mail order brides. And that also is an exploration of kind of the falsehood of the American dream and what people give up in order to pursue that. But my favorite two really have more to do with, I really just love when writers write about their own experience, and when they write about like their difficulties writing, or when they write about other forms of art. I just really like it. I like things that are meta, so I think that's why I like it, but I also just feel like it's closer to their everyday life, and so sometimes they just treat it in a more interesting way or in a better way. So I really liked Featured Background. This talks about the experience of a father who's estranged from his daughter. The daughter is now a well-known filmmaker who makes pieces about the Asian American experience and all of the like microaggressions and her difficult life as the daughter of an alcoholic. And then the father is picking up all of these extra parts because he wants to perhaps run into his daughter. So it's called Featured Background. It reminded me a lot of a book I really liked called Interior Chinatown, which is also about it's about like Asian American and Asians in media and TV. But there's a really impactful part in that short story where he does end up on the set of his daughter's next film, and she's trying to do something super edgy. So she is depicting, one of the scenes has like a lot of violence between, I don't know who's like committing the violence, but basically an elderly Asian person gets beat up. And so she's asking the extra, like, to get spit on or to get beat up. And the extra is like, sorry, like, I don't want to do this. Can I get my SAG rep? Can I talk to them? And then the director's like, this is a very important part of the film. We have to show that, like, abuse against elderly Asians is on the rise. So she's very, like, one-track minded in using this pain for her own art. You know what I mean? And the extra says, oh, so doing it more of it is how you're gonna address that, and she goes, oh, it's not real, like this is, you're just an extra. So I love that little like commentary on using like the pain and the lived experience of underrepresented groups, especially by like those groups. Like this is an Asian filmmaker, but in terms of like how that plays out on a set or to the real people that are there and are being involved. But then the father's like, I'll do it, like you can beat me up on camera. So I really thought that was, I also like the perspective of that short story because it was told from the point of view of like an older dude, a father who like has a lot of hangups and has a lot of anxiety, but also is like trying to reconnect but doesn't know how. Anyway, the last novella, Casualties of Art, I really love because it's about writers at a writer's retreat, and like who knows that subject matter better than like young writers. I just feel like it's really like write what you know. The main character is a Chinese Korean American named David. It explores a little bit the idea of like masculinity among Asian males and how that has affected his psyche and his relationships with women. But I also just really liked the depiction and the exploration of, trying to make art and how much you should draw on your own lived experience. It's kind of similar to the themes in Featured Background, because one of the things that David struggles with is he doesn't want to do autofiction. Like everything he writes, the characters don't have race or descriptors or names even. And in the writer's retreat, and he meets another woman named Sophia who is a visual artist, everyone is like, you need to use your identity as content, or you need to use your identity as like fertile grounds for your art. And he feels a really strong resistance to that. And so that to me is really interesting. Sophia, the visual artist, her thing is like doing these big paintings of the Asian female body, but then like doing cross sections of what's inside. And it's supposed to be a statement on like how probably like the over-sexualization of the Asian body, but also like what is inside as opposed to what society sees or something like that. But the other thing that David does is he always tries to like flatten the people around him into little narratives in his head, and he lives in a very kind of prescriptive, messed up way. And by the end of the novella, he hopefully has like let go of that a little bit, because a lot of the frustration he feels from society as being flattened into a one-dimensional like Asian dude, he has also then done to other people in his life. I think the ending of that novella is a little bit weak. So basically David, the main character, is an accountant, but he also is potentially a great creative writer because he took like one creative fiction class in college. But as a kid, he loved the Choose Your Own Adventure books, and his mom or his dad always chastised the other for letting him read those because it was like silly and not a real profession. And then the novella itself also ends with like multiple endings, so it's definitely like a callback to the whole choose your own ending, choose your own adventure. But I can't help but feel it's like a little bit of a cop-out, because I really do feel strongly that you have to like set up your short story or your novel for one ending and commit to it. But that didn't detract overall from my enjoyment of that novella. I think in general, you should definitely check this out. The short stories are really different from each other, even though they have kind of a unifying theme or experience. Obviously, this is an experience of identity that I relate to a lot and that I find a lot of enjoyment and interest in. But I think for anyone, she has a lot to say, and she's really doing innovative and interesting things with the whole sci-fi premise, and she's using these different vehicles to do something new. So I found this to be really fresh and exciting, and I would check it out. Okay, and then imagine my surprise when this was also a really good collection of short stories. And the thing I want to highlight about this is, even though a lot of these short stories were published on different publication dates and in different publications, the way they were collected into this collection really works. There are some characters that overlap, but it isn't heavy-handed. I'm not constantly thinking as a reader like, oh, is this person from that story? Like I just kind of let it be. And sometimes I was like, oh, this is the same character, but it wasn't something that I had to like overtly think about all the time. I think the themes are really resonant across the collection, and I think one thing that ties together all of the short stories in this really well is the really strong sense of place. Like, that is my favorite thing about this short story collection, is each short story takes place in, almost all of them take place in a different location, and the sense of place is just so strong. It is, you feel like you're there. It is definitely a character in the story. And this is a Singaporean author, mostly writing about Singaporeans, but I love that it doesn't just take place in Singapore, because for a certain subset of Singaporeans, the Singaporean experience is really tied to travel and interacting with like Crazy Rich Asians in Europe, or going to Bangkok and having a friend there, or being in Singapore. So there are some stories that are set in Singapore, but I just loved how finally we have like a collection of Singaporean experiences that don't just like have to take place in Singapore specifically. So in this short story collection, we have 3, 6, 9, 10, 11 short stories. Some of them are quite short. Probably the clearest thread that we have in terms of character is this woman named Sophia. We start out with her honeymoon, where she's married this Angmo guy named Nicholas, if I'm not wrong, and they're in Zurich for their honeymoon. Then later in the short story called Sophia's Aunt, we're in Beijing because Nicholas needs a heart transplant, and the only place he can get approved to do it is in some shady public hospital in China. And then we end with Sophia's party, which is after he's recovered from the heart surgery. She's hosting a National Day party for her friends, and we get some really good dialogue and description of like class and just how Sophia's friends from her world are so obsessed with NDP and like love it. And especially her freaking out over the Red Lions is so funny to me, because I also love the Red Lions. It's when the parachuters come out of the plane, but just, yeah. I mean, when I take a step back, I also do know that this is like a militaristic display of national propaganda, even though I really do love NDP. And so I think that it was a great depiction of that, especially in this couple that's like interracial. I do think the stories that take place in Singapore are the strongest. Even though I've said that I do really enjoy the sense of place in the other stories, I would really highlight Harmonious Residences, which is a short story about a construction worker, a migrant Chinese worker, whose head gets severed in the elevator on a construction site for a new HDB called Harmonious Residences, and then what the civil servant, I think he's a scholar, because there's several scholars in this book, and I would love to know how many Singaporean authors are scholars themselves, because so much Singlit that I've read always talks about being a scholar, or if scholars just like live rent-free in all of these authors' minds. But what this scholar civil servant has to do to kind of like what the process is and everything that unfolds, and kind of the loss of humanity of this guy who literally died. And then I also really love National Day, which follows the story of multiple migrant workers. On National Day, they go to Lazarus Island to try and watch the fireworks. It's a smidge heavy-handed, but I don't think for 2015 it would have been heavy-handed at all. I think after COVID, there was like a collective recollection of, or realization of the treatment of migrant workers, although it hasn't been really improved much. But I think if you think back 10 years ago, just having the story through the lens of migrant workers and kind of that weird dissonance of them having built so much of this country, but then not being fully accepted or feeling like they belong, particularly on a day like National Day, which is like such an outward display of national pride. I think that was just such a topic that was treated so well in this short story. The weaker short stories follow a woman who's like homeless, I guess, or like is trying to escape her stressful life and like overstayed her visa, and she goes to like various cities. They were fine. They weren't my favorite. Again, my favorite was this short story called Tick, because it's about a writer who has writer's block and tries to go to this cabin in the woods and like churn out some words. And I just feel like writers write that topic so well, because it's like so obvious that they've been through it themselves. And just the metaphor of like the tick, because he's out in the woods and there's like ticks everywhere, and like he really doesn't do well with being out of the city, and just that experience of feeling like blood-sucking creatures all over you versus the experience of trying to like write and produce something. I felt like it was a very good metaphor, and then that short story had the best ending. I LOL'd. It was so good. This also has an epigraph. The epigraph is, "Thresholds are safe, but unfortunately you can't stay on them forever," by Kate Atkinson, who is a British author. It's from her book Behind the Scenes at the Museum. And one of the short stories is called Schwellenangst, which is a German word for fear of stepping over a threshold. I don't think it is a really strong thread throughout the whole collection, but it's definitely this idea of liminal spaces and the threshold of like who you want to be, the choices you make, and also that spatial geographic threshold of like being Singaporean outside of Singapore. So as you can tell, I was also very excited by this. It's such a treat to like have to read things and have them be good. So I am a fan of the short story collection. I think in the past I'd read some that were more, they're from disparate authors, so that's kind of a different beast. These are all like obviously one author kind of writing resonant things that are synchronistic across time, or I'm not really sure Elaine's, if hers were all over 1 year or over a longer period. But I would definitely check out either of these. Thanks so much for watching this video if you made it this far. If you've checked out either of these, let me know what you think, and I'll catch you in the next one, guys.